Hi there, welcome back to DIY Book. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to make a perfect bound book, or what's commonly called a paperback book. Something kind of like this. So the first thing I need is some pages to work with. So I've printed out my novel on A4 4 up, so that's 4 page impressions on one sheet of A4 paper. And then I cut it across the middle, which on A4 is at 14.8 centimeters. Which gives me a stack of pages about this size. So now I need to fold them. Now I've tried all different ways to fold pages to try and speed up the process, because when you're folding, say, 400 pages for a novel, it can take a long time. And if you're doing just, one page and then another and another, it's pretty time consuming. No, I've tried to go in the opposite direction and mechanize the process, and I bought some mailroom machinery. I tried 2 different machines which are made for folding gatefold sort of brochures and such, and I found that because they weren't specifically made for A5, every once in a while they'd skew the pages. It was really hard to get the measurements right because I was kind of jerry-rigging them to do it, and from time to time, as I said, they would skew a page or just crumple it completely, which when it's in the middle of a manuscript is really awkward, because you then have to find that page again and figure out the right back page to go on it with imposition, and then print that out again and cut it and fit it in. It was just a nightmare, so I eBayed those away, as happily we can do in this day and age. But what I've landed on ultimately is a thing called a creasing board or a scoring board. And this is a crafting tool. You can get cheap ones that are just a piece of MDF or particle board with a sort of groove cut down the middle that you can then use a bone folder or a butter knife or whatever you like to crease. They're made for making greeting cards and such. Now, what I like about this big one, which again is a bit more expensive but nothing compared to mailroom machinery, is that you can make boxes out of it. And so, here I've made a box for some artist trading cards that I made. And you can also make slip covers out of just, cereal box board. You can make a slip cover for a book, which I quite like. But what's handy here is that it has a pre-marked space for A5 in half. So I just go over that, and it gives me a sort of reliable place to judge where to fold and try and do it the right way. And so here I've done about 4 or 5 pages, and then I just separate them, making sure that I get them separate and don't leave any nested in each other, and do that until I've got my whole stack. And so it's not machine fast, but it multiplies the process of going, one page at a time by about 4 or 5 times, and it gives you a nice, even, predictable fold. So what I want to do now is to attach these pages together and fix them to a cover. Now, I've tried a number of different contraptions that people offer, each of which have their own merits, but ultimately you want to find a way that works for you. So for me, that ended up, I guess, quite poetically doing it myself, coming up with a press that works the way I want to work. So what I wanted was to be able to get really close to my pages and to just cinch them together. A lot of other things sort of buried the thing inside a bit of machinery or some such, so it was hard to see what you were doing. So here I line up the pages as much as possible, kind of jog them back and forth to get them even from end to end. And they're not going to be perfect because it's a hand process, but you can use the screws on either end to line up the pages and try and get it close to the edge, but not completely flush, because you don't want to glue the press to your pages. I speak from experience here. And then, having done that, I will press one of the sides through and tighten it. And then you still have a little bit of room to keep shuggling it back and forth, and then push that through, tighten it up, and then give it a final good cinching here. Quite often it helps to put it down and do it against the surface of the desk. Now I'm going to trim my book so I don't have to be super careful, because I've left some bleed space around the edge so that I can cut it off, because you see it's not perfect. The folds aren't perfect, and so the trimming helps with that. If you're doing a book manually and you don't have access to a copy shop or someplace that has a guillotine that can trim it for you, you may want to go with just a full size sheet, because you can fold it a bit more reliably. You could also use a utility knife and a metal ruler and very carefully trim the pages. I haven't had super success with that, but it's an option. Or you can use a decal edge blade or ruler and tear the edges of the pages, which gives it a sort of antique-y look and makes it a deliberate mistake. Now what's next is to glue this. So I've got a pot of glue here, and this is just regular PVA glue, although actually the one that I've found, it's called Roscoe Flex Bond. It's amazing. It's PVA glue like the white glue that you'd find in a craft store, except it's made for gluing stage flats together. So it's nice and thin, spreads really easily, dries very quickly, but it's really rubbery when it's solved, when it's cured. So it means your pages, you can really bend them back and forth, and you know they're not going to come apart. So I'm just using a little spatula here to put this on, and I'm trying to get it into all the little creases here. And because of the way this dries, it's kind of the more the better, because it'll give me a nice even surface when I put this into the cover, which I'll show you in a moment. And you want to make especially sure to hit the outside pages, because when I was first doing this I didn't do that, and the first or last pages would come fluttering out of the book, which is quite embarrassing if you've just given it to somebody. So get in all the little corners, and on my press I've put grease-proof paper on the top and the bottom, so that if I do hit it a little bit with the glue, it's alright. I can easily take it off again afterwards. So I do one coat like this, just to make sure that all the pages are really securely held together. There we go. And I'll put that aside to dry. And now, once I've done that, you can see how it's clear, but it's a really thick rubbery coating there. And now I'm going to attach it to the cover. So this is another press I made. It's exactly the same as this one, except I've put a tall back on it and a bottom, just so that I don't have to have my hands on it. It's a little more complicated to make, and I'm not a great woodworker, but if I can do it, anyone can do it. So this has dried, so these pages are all fixed to themselves, making what's called book block. So now I've put a sheet of black paper into the press behind it, which is quite easy to do at this stage because this is all one solid piece. And now what I'm going to do is secure this cover to it. So I'll just give it a fold first, just to make sure that it folds over nicely. And then I'm going to, again, paint this up really well with the glue. And this will both secure the pages again to each other, making sure that really none of them will fall out. And then I just flip this over, and I'll put a weight on it and allow this to dry for a couple of hours, although this glue dries pretty quickly, so it really doesn't take very long. Now, I've tried hot glue before, and it gives a nice thick fill in between the pages, but I just found it was too scary to work with. You've got these molten strings of glue and a very short setting time to work with. So if you're comfortable with that, you can work with your book right away after this and not have to set it aside to dry, but you're using electricity as opposed to doing something manual, and it quickly dries, so you really don't have a lot of time to work with, and if it dries, it creates a hard blob that sort of leaves a mark or a bubble in your spine. Now you can use a hot air gun or like a blow dryer to soften that again, but it's a lot of extra work. PVA glue is really cheap, really easy to find, and does a good job. So that's that. So here we go. I'm going to trim this, and there are markings on the side of this machine. You move the sort of back guard back and forth with this handle, but I've put my own little centimeter rule here, which I find helps me a lot. For when I'm taking the stack of my pages which I've printed out, I'll put them in here, and I know 14.8 I can cut them in half. So I'll line this up as best I can here, and then use the handle in back to hold it down in place, lock it in place. This guard has to be in the way, and then you release it, and that takes the edges of the pages off. Now I'd like to do a little bit more if I'm going to do it again. And because it's just so heavy and the blade's so sharp, it just goes through it like butter. So I'll reverse it and just move it forward a wee bit. Press that down again. And again, I'm being quite conservative here, so I'm not getting all the pages. Speaks to how uneven they are. And there we go. So that's pretty good. And now I'll do the outside edge. Just crank this forward. Cinch that down. And there we go. Nice even book. Now that my book is all trimmed, nicely put together, I'm happy with that. There are just a couple of finishing touches I'll do with it. I had stamps made of the titles the way I had them printed inside, and so I'm just going to use some white ink here and put the title on the front, making sure it is in fact the front. Yes, there's that, and I'm going to put a cover on it, but this is just a nice little touch if somebody chooses to remove the cover. I'll put my logo on the back, and then I also have a serial number, so I'll put a unique number in the book. This is just something I do for myself. Then I'll put another copy of that in a book in which I keep track of them all. And I've printed out a cover beforehand. I used sort of recycled craft paper because the book's about climate change, so that seemed sort of thematic. And I've sort of pre-folded it so I know it's going to fit in place here. And I've got some, it's sort of a repositional, kind of like a post-it note glue that I got. So I'll put some of that. So it should hold the cover in place, but if the reader wants, they can remove it. And I'll just put that over the front, wrap it around the back. Place that there. And voila, a paperback book.